You're listening to Media Savvy Moms with Melody and Marilyn, a podcast by Parents Aware, your go-to for information on how to talk to kids and teens about pornography and healthy sexuality. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Media Savvy Moms. Today we have a special guest with us, Glendyne Gerrard. She helped found Defend Dignity, an initiative of the Christian and Missionary Alliance in 2010 after meeting and being challenged by a survivor of prostitution. She has been giving direction to this nonprofit organization ever since. She is passionate about ending all forms of sexual exploitation in Canada. She's been married for 42 years to her husband, Doug, and together they have 3 married children and 8 grandchildren. They live in Oakville, Ontario. And today we are going to be continuing that conversation about how to get involved in the community and fighting against pornography and exploitation. And we're so grateful to have Glendyne with us today. We know she's busy and she's always working really hard in these initiatives. And thanks so much for joining us today, Glendyne.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to go ahead and pass the interview over to Marilyn.
Hi, Glendyne, and welcome. So we've covered a little bit in that introduction how Defend Dignity got started, but as Melody said, you are busy. Your organization covers a lot of topics related to this issues of exploitation. So give us a little bit more of the history of how you got started and what you're doing today.
All right, I'll do my best to keep it short because it's a story, that's for sure. We're a national organization that works to end all forms of sexual exploitation here in Canada. And as she said, it is an initiative of the Christian and Missionary Alliance churches. But thankfully, we go beyond all sorts of faith boundaries, and we work with the police, with other organizations, service providers, survivors, government, and of course the general public. So we're grateful for that. And we started in 2010. There was really just a few of us that were leaders in a different organization, but were challenged to take a look at a justice issue facing women and children in Canada. And so, we wondered what that would be. Somebody, a mutual friend, introduced me to a survivor of sexual exploitation, of prostitution, named Trish. And so we said, why don't we have Trish come and spend a day with us? We'd love to hear her story. We'd love to hear what the challenges and issues are around sexual exploitation in Canada. So she did that, but she very wisely said to me, I'm only going to come if you agree to read and watch everything that I'm going to send to you. So she sent just copious amounts of reports and stories and all sorts of things to help prepare me for what we were going to hear the day she spent with us. And it was really sitting in my office, poring over all of these reports for a couple of weeks, where I knew instinctively this was the issue that we needed to get involved in. I found myself saying, how is it that this kind of thing can happen here in my country and I have no idea about it?
Yeah, we just don't know what we don't know, right?
Right. And so I felt like, okay, if I don't know this stuff, how many other people don't know this? And so that was really the birthing. So by the time that Trish came and spent the day, we all looked at each other, and she, again, very wisely looked at us and said, you all have some level of influence. Why don't you use your influence to make a difference on this issue in Canada? And that was kind of it.
So it's been 10 years.
Yeah, hard to believe.
Yeah, I didn't realize it had been that long. So in those 10 years, you have made significant impact in the laws of your country, which is also my country. So I can speak to that. But you're always fighting. You're always fighting to keep and protect those laws. I know that. Yeah. So let's talk about a campaign that you run every year for the last few years to get citizens involved.
Yeah, so that campaign is called Choose Change, and the website is choosechangecanada.org. And, that really grew out of our experience with advocating with government. So suddenly we realized that there had been some effective change, because of some of the advocacy work we did. And we traveled the country and really tried to engage Canadians back when our prostitution laws were changed in 2014. And so we felt like, we learned a lot through that whole process. And one of the key things that we learned was engaging the public. So not just making them aware, but then giving them a way to get involved is really effective. So that was sort of in the back of our minds, sort of along this journey. So probably 2014, 2015, we recognized the link of pornography to the other issues of sexual exploitation. So we broadened our focus. And so now we were not just addressing what most people would think of when they think of prostitution, the selling of sexual services, but we wanted to broaden it to pornography.
I just want to pause you there for a second, because
Sure.
I know that I wasn't clear until I got involved in this movement. I didn't pay attention to what prostitution laws were in my
Right.
country. So
Okay.
can you just, for our listeners, let us know what very briefly, what the prostitution laws are and why we want to protect them?
Sure. So prostitution laws now in Canada, as of 2014, it's called the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. That's the actual name of the legislation. And so we followed here what some people refer to as the Nordic model of law. So that means that the mostly women who are selling are no longer criminalized, because most often they are not there by choice, but because of exploitation and lots of vulnerabilities. But rather, the buyers are charged. And so that's what's happened here in Canada. Some people reference that now as the equality model, because it is expanding to other countries, and not just the Nordic countries. So we think it's a really good model. It's been in place now for just over 5 years. It was put into place in December of 2014. So what was written into the legislation is a 5-year review. And so we've passed that 5-year point, right, in December of 2019. So any time now, what we think has happened is that COVID-19, of course, is keeping our government busy. But at some point soon, we expect that that will be reviewed. And so we want to stay really on top of that with how the review process looks. We've had events on Parliament Hill to try to encourage our parliamentarians to keep it in place, that we're seeing some good results. There are a number of police forces and crown attorneys, et cetera, that are using that legislation. And we think it's good, and we need to continue to use it and to get more and more data, right? 5 years really isn't all that long for new legislation. So that's some of the work that we do.
Sorry to get you off track there for
Yeah,
a little bit.
Well, we love talking about that.
That is your passion. So just in brief, it's designed to protect the vulnerable women and then to not protect the buyers.
Right, to really focus the attention where it needs to lie, on all of these men that are purchasing and who are causing harm, because so often, not in every case, but buyers are often violent. And the whole system is built on patriarchy and the fact that men need to have power over women. So many of the same themes that we see in pornography, we clearly see in prostitution. And so we're happy that the focus is really on the buyer, where we think it needs to be. For sure, we want to go after pimps and traffickers. That's all good, and Canada has good trafficking legislation. But in terms of prostitution legislation, the focus is on buyers, and we're grateful for at least pockets of our country which are really, really using that legislation and seeing some good results. Yeah.
Okay, let's first finish what the Choose Change campaign is and how that might relate to these other issues.
Okay, sure. So Choose Change is a focus on companies or organizations which sometimes unwittingly, often unwittingly, have policies or practices in place that would allow for the ease of access to sexually violent images. So it's a campaign. If you go to the website, it'll be really clear for you, but it's a campaign where we target, typically it's 5. This year we've got 6. 6 different companies, 5 or 6 companies, most often Canadian this time around, not exclusively Canadian. and asking them to change those practices or policies so that no longer will the average Canadian, and especially children, have access to those kinds of images. So, in the past, we've targeted, for instance, library systems, and people are often really surprised that libraries would not have filtered Wi-Fi on all of their public computers. But as we've discovered, most of them in Canada don't have it. And so for a couple of years, we had the Toronto Public Library System on our list. We had last year we had the Vancouver Public Library System on our list. And in both cases, we're so grateful. We had face-to-face meetings with them, and they cite intellectual freedom as the reason why they don't want to put that in place. Even though, kids, other patrons, all sorts of people can be exposed to pornography if somebody chooses to be viewing that on a public computer
So
in
what you're
their
saying is
libraries.
my children could be walking through a
Yeah,
public library and one of the patrons at the library can be viewing pornography and they're walking past and have full view of what
exactly.
they are watching. Hmm.
Yeah, and we gather stories about the different companies that we're targeting. And so we know for sure that that's happened in Canada, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere when there's not good filtering in place. So yeah, it's hard to believe that somebody would actually go into a library and use it. But one of the little interesting stories I have. So my colleague that works with me on this, part of our Defend Dignity team, Arlene and myself were sitting in the main library in Toronto, waiting to go in to talk to the director. And where they put us to wait was actually in the area of all their public computers. So there was probably, 100 terminals. All of them are being used. So nobody was coming to get us. So I said, I'm just going to take a little wander around these computers and look for myself. And sure enough, somebody's watching things that are inappropriate in this public setting. So, so clearly it happens. And even though, libraries say, well, we try to monitor, which I'm sure they do, and I'm grateful that they do have people sort of wandering around, but clearly that's not going to capture and catch everybody that's doing that. So that's the kind of thing we do. We've had some success stories, so maybe I'll just tell you about some of our successes, which are always really fun to talk about. That's with two restaurant chains. So our first success story was with the Keg, and if you're Canadian, you know that that's a great restaurant. They serve wonderful steak dinners and in a very nice atmosphere. And they had been sort of publicizing the fact that they were now putting public Wi-Fi in all of their restaurants. So we do some checking, of course, and discovered that no, it wasn't being filtered. And we thought, you know what, we're gonna ask them to put filters on all of their restaurants in Canada. So it took a couple of months, and but they did get back to us and said, you know what, this is a really good idea. We do want families to feel like they can use it safely in our restaurants, and so they did it. They complied, and so that was our first win. And yeah, we were really happy about that. And the second win was with Boston Pizza restaurant chain, and that happened back in 2018. And in that case, it took all of 2 weeks for them to spot it, and how they came to be aware of it, because what the campaign does is we invite people to send emails and tweets to
Yeah.
the different companies, and they had seen the tweets coming through. And so one day, sitting at my desk in my office, I see a call coming through, and it says Boston Pizza, and I'm like, oh, this will be interesting. And sure enough, they said, we've seen your campaign. We think it's a really smart idea. I want to tell you right now that in the next few weeks, every single one of our restaurants in Canada will put content blocking in place. We're going to have filtered Wi-Fi. We want to live up to our reputation that we're a really family-friendly restaurant, and that's the kind of atmosphere we want. And I promise you, I'm going to call you on the day when the last restaurant has this in place. And she did.
Fantastic. That's
So that
so
was
exciting.
it was super exciting. And they even took it a step further and said, we're going to send the details of your campaign and the website to every single one of our employees across the country. And we're going to do some tweeting and social media about it ourselves, which they also did. So
Fantastic. Well, we'll just
yeah,
little shout out to Boston Pizza there.
yeah,
Good
yeah,
job.
yeah,
So these are really exciting to know that like businesses do pay attention to what customers say.
Yeah,
They
they do.
and so when we put pressure on them, they want to change. That's
Yeah.
the idea. So when we're going to take a break now, and
Mhm.
when we come back, we're going to talk about this year's campaign and what we can do as parents to really make a difference.
If you're like us, you probably spend a lot of time worrying about your kids, and especially wondering if they're safe on the digital devices and apps they're using. We have a tool that can help you. It's called the Bark app. That's Bark, B-A-R-K. Bark's logo is a little barking dog, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's like a little dog that goes sniffing through your kids' content and looking for danger. It will monitor 24/7 all your kids' content and alert you if there's something dangerous that falls into the categories like drugs and alcohol, violence, sexual content, self-harm, profanity, weapons, or changes to their accounts. If you get an alert, then it will send you a little ping and also suggestions on how to talk to your child about the problem. We have a special 30-day trial for our listeners. You can try out the app and test drive it for 30 days. Just go in, download the app, and at checkout, use the code MEDIASAVVY.
And we're back with Glendyne of Defend Dignity and the Choose Change campaign. So in the first half, we talked a bit more about the history of Defend Dignity and how the Choose Change campaign came to be. But this year's campaign is different because we are all in social isolation. And
Yeah.
so some of the things that you focused on in past years, you felt it was not the right time to press that campaign. So
Yeah.
this year, I love what you've called it. It's the Choose Change Canada Home Edition.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, we felt like, everybody's at home and everybody's online, and especially our kids, right? I don't know the exact stats. Maybe you do, but I know for sure that online usage is up. And so we took a hard look at that and said, okay, what are some of the things that we could be addressing? And we'd already been doing some work with some other national organizations from different countries around Instagram, which we'll probably chat about here in a minute. But looked at some other social media companies. And so we've got Snapchat and TikTok on our list this year, as well as Instagram. And then Zoom, because everybody's using Zoom. And, I'm grateful that even since we've started this, they are making changes. And that's one thing that we try to do with our Choose Change campaign is when these companies are making changes, even if they're small ones, we want to cheer them on, right? We're really happy that they're doing that. And so Zoom's done that. And then the other two companies are credit card companies, Visa and MasterCard, because they're getting used to purchase things on pornography sites. And so we're saying, hey, MasterCard and Visa, why don't you be like PayPal, which has stopped uh, uh, doing that? You cannot make purchases through pornography sites using PayPal any longer since 2019. And so Visa, MasterCard, would you please step up and do the same thing and not allow that? So those are the
Wow,
6 companies
that
that we're
that's
focusing on.
significant. And
Yeah,
we don't think that we can target these big financial companies, right?
right. Yeah,
That but PayPal did it. You're right. I'd completely
yeah,
forgotten that. And
yeah,
why not ask MasterCard and Visa to not participate in exploitation? It's
yeah.
totally reasonable.
Yeah, very reasonable. And a lot of these companies, and so we do some research and we quote back to them what we find in some of their ethical standards. And so a lot of these companies make these statements in their policies and practices and so on. And so we just remind them of that when we're saying, hey, how does this actually fit with this statement that you've made about who you want to be as a company? So that's always served us in good stead
Uh-huh.
to try to remind them of the things that they're saying themselves. Yeah.
Okay, so we have talked about TikTok in a previous episode, and
Hmm.
that is a huge, huge concern. Lots of
Yeah.
problems there. But today, another big concern for parents is Instagram. There is also probably a lack of awareness for many parents of some of the dangers that are targeting kids through Instagram.
Yeah.
So tell us about what you're doing and what you're asking parents to do to get Instagram to change?
Sure. Well, predators, when my kids were younger, I used to say, don't talk to strangers, look out in places like malls and parks and other places where kids were. Well, nowadays, because kids are all online, so are predators online. And in fact, recent stat that our organization has discovered that is that now grooming and luring of children is taking place 55% of the time through social media apps.
Wow.
So parents have got to be vigilant about their kids' usage. So even before I get into some of the asks that we have of Instagram, just a reminder again, and perhaps your audience has heard this multiple times, but parents, we really encourage you to have the accounts and the passwords of your kids. I know sometimes parents get concerned about privacy issues, but I can tell you that every single police department that we speak with, every single police officer on these issues related to sexual exploitation and prostitution and human trafficking would all tell you the exact same thing. Because predators are online, and that is the most common place that kids are now being lured into sexual exploitation. So when you think of, a predator like outside of social media, well, they are going to operate the exact same way inside social media, in that they're going to pay attention to what's being posted on your child's whatever social media app. So in this case, Instagram. They'll be looking at pictures. They'll be looking at anything that they can then reference to make it sound as if they know your child.
Mm-hmm.
And so parents need to be seeing that and watching that. So the big request that we have of Instagram, and we've got a few of them, and you can see all of this in the pre-written email when you go to the site. The first one would be that Instagram, you need to make the highest privacy setting the default setting. So if your child signs up for Instagram, and by the way, Instagram itself says that you have to be 12 years or older. Now, sadly, we know that there are younger kids that have an Instagram account, so that's a whole other issue. But Instagram needs to make the highest privacy setting the default setting so that the child or the parent don't have to go hunting. How do I make this happen?
Yeah,
Right. So
and I'm just
right
gonna,
now,
I know you're going to tell a story in a bit, but recently there was a video circulating from Bark that they went undercover, and
yes,
it was incredible how quickly this woman who was posing as a
yeah,
teenage girl between 11 and 13 years old, how
yes,
quickly she was being solicited by predators.
yeah,
And we think it's not our kids that are going to be targeted, but as you mentioned, they are so cunning
yeah,
and they find ways, they find the vulnerabilities and
exactly.
they go right to them. This is what I've
Yeah,
been learning from organizations like yours
yeah.
about the way predators target online. I'm
Yeah, I saw that same story on Bark. I thought, and it's exactly true. And we've got. I know Bark is a U.S. organization, but we've got Canadian stories, lots of them that are exactly the same. There was one that was in the news here just a couple of months ago about a 9-year-old girl here in Ontario. All of a sudden, one night, the police are at the door of this girl's home. Parents have no idea why they're there. They go immediately to look for a phone where they had been looking around for child porn online, as police departments and ICE units do. And sure enough, this 9-year-old girl had an Instagram account. She had been approached by a predator who showed her pictures of private body parts and then invited her to do the same, to pose certain ways and send these pictures back. And that's what was going on. And
9 years
so
old.
9 years old, and all through this was all happening. So this is the other ask we have of Instagram. This was happening through the direct messaging component on Instagram, where anybody, unless you've got really strong privacy settings, can direct message your child. And so if you're just looking and you're not looking at the direct messages, right? You're not looking at the comments on the different pictures, the different, posts or comments, then this direct messaging is open to anybody. Anybody can direct message your child. And so we're saying to Instagram, please, that has to be addressed. That should not be allowed on the account of any minor. Um, I was speaking in a small prairie town here a couple of summers ago, and the host of the event said to me when I showed up to speak, and was going to talk about some of the work we do, and he said, "I can't believe that the timing of all of this, because my 12-year-old daughter started an account with full approval of her parents with a few other kids, all her age, so some of her friends, because they were sort of amateur photographers and they wanted to have a place to post their pictures.
Yeah.
Within 2 days of opening this account, and thank goodness the parents had gotten the passwords, and that was the only way they gave them permission to open this account. So she was on, the mom was checking this account, and don't you know, there was a direct message
Uh-huh.
from a guy saying, "Love your pictures," using flattery, which exploiters and predators do, and saying, "Would you ever like to make some money? And would you be willing to send pictures of yourselves?"
Wow.
So all of these things within 2 days of her opening this account. And that's where, people in small towns that often I think used to think, "Oh, we're safe from this, exploitation only happens in big cities." Well, now with social media, right, it happens anywhere and everywhere. And so, we really have to be vigilant, and we really want these companies to step up their safety protocols, to be far more vigilant than they are, which leads me to the second ask of Instagram, is that the whole reporting. So they have stepped up a little bit where you can report a post that's causing you concern or comment, or a direct message, or just the account in general is showing, hypersexualized stuff, or whatever the concern is. So they have stepped it up. So kudos to them for stepping it up, but it's not enough.
Uh-huh.
And so, again, another story. I had somebody reach out to me just 2 weeks ago. He's a new Canadian. Um, English is not his first language, and shared a few different accounts by the same individual. So everything's not in English in terms of the words. So they're actually videos. And so shared the accounts with me. I took a look. His concern was that on these very sexualized videos that are being shown, she is actually inviting children to send her the same type of videos. So sexual poses, sexual acts, and it's blatant. But he had reported this and sent me the screenshots of Instagram saying, "Well, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you."
But they never got
They
back to
they haven't got back to him, and so I also reported the same account and the same thing. Nothing's happened.
him. Okay.
So I know that there's more and more of those kinds of stories because we're working with other organizations around the world, and I'm hearing some of the same things.
Good. Thank you for sharing this. It's so eye-opening. Now, um, we need to wrap up, but one really important component of this Choose Change campaign is to share your story. So, so two things. Tell us, well, you're going to give us a challenge at the end, and that will
Mhm.
tell parents exactly where to go to get involved. But how do they share their story, and what happens with that?
Sure. Well, there's a contact tab on the Choose Change website. And so you can go there, and then embedded throughout the site, there's multiple places where you can just click the link that says share story. The reason for that is because we are in consultation and we are actually talking with Instagram executives. These stories, in fact, the Instagram people are saying to us, "Give us stories, give us stories, give us stories,"
Mhm.
because it's going to help them understand the realities and the challenges that exist on their social media platform. And again, a shout out to them. Like they want to know, they want to be able to mitigate some of the harm that's happening. And so these stories, I think, just really prove our point. So I can assure you that nothing gets shared beyond what you want to be shared. We can keep stories anonymous, all of those things, but they really do help us in our quest to help these companies pay attention to some of the harm that's happening out there.
So if you have children and you have stories where you've been concerned about what's happening on your children's social media accounts, just send them in, and you
Yeah,
can control
yeah,
how much privacy you want with that story. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Glendyne. I'm going to turn it over to Melody. She'll give us a bit of a recap, and then we're going to come back to you to find out how we can get involved.
Thanks so much for joining us, Glendyne. We're so inspired by your work and grateful for your inspiration to our parents on specific things we can do. Here are some of the highlights that we got from the show today. When you were talking about starting out originally and hearing Trish's story, the survivor of prostitution that inspired you to start on this journey to begin with, you talked about how when your eyes were opened about these issues, how you felt like if you were concerned about these issues and didn't even realize how big of a problem these were, then how could everybody else know? And Marilyn had said, we just don't know what we don't know. And we keep coming back to that. We don't know what we don't know. So we really need to educate ourselves. You also talked about how there's a link between pornography and all of these other forms of exploitation. And that is another theme that we keep coming back to, how sexual exploitation and trafficking and pornography and all of these other forms are in the internet and predators, and it's all connected. It all comes back. And so when we're fighting one, we need to be aware of all of these other hazards. We talked about success stories, and that was happy. We need to be sure that when there are good things happening, that we are giving companies a pat on the back and cheering them on. We mentioned PayPal and that it's a huge company, and that I loved how that you pointed out that we need to take a look at when we're fighting in this arena, to look at the ethical statements of some of these big companies and to use their own words and call them out and remind them that they have these core values that they want to stick to when we're asking them to fight alongside us to protect children. We are talking about how we're all stuck at home right now, and so I love the Choose Change Home Edition idea, that we need to be aware that even though we're feeling like we're safe in our bubbles at home, that we're still vulnerable and our children are vulnerable while we're online, and that predators, even though we're not out in the malls or in the parks, that they can still groom and flatter and victimize our children, that we need to keep them safe, and that you've given us ways to look at the places where we are, like Instagram, and to specifically take steps where we can protect our children. And on that note, we are going to turn the time back over to you to give us a challenge for this week.
Well, thank you. Boy, you did a great summary. First challenge I would say is just simply go to choosechangecanada.org. It will take you, I am positive, no more than 5 minutes, probably less, to fill out the information. You simply put your name and email into those pre-written emails. They go directly to the executives of all of these 6 companies that we're focusing on. It goes through the website, but it comes from your email. And so you don't have to be worried that you're going to be getting a lot of bombardments back from us. If you do that, in fact, you can check off a mark that says, yeah, I'd love to hear if you have any success stories, and then we'll get back in touch with you. But if you don't check that off, you're not going to hear from us again. So I'd love to see you participate in the campaign that way. And then there is also a place where you can share this on your own social media accounts or send an email to somebody. And so that would be my second suggestion, is that you share this, because we know the power of sharing through social media. And the more people that get involved, the more public pressure that's applied and the more change that will happen.
Thank you so much, Glendyne. We will link to some shares, and we'll put them on our Facebook page so that we can easily access them. One question before we say goodbye. Do you need to be a resident of Canada to participate in this campaign?
No, you don't. No, you can send away, and that will work anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so this is open to everyone across the globe.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here today and teaching us more about how we can get involved to end exploitation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Media Savvy Moms podcast. For detailed show notes and links to any of the resources mentioned today, visit parentsaware.info. To connect with us on social media, find us on Instagram at Media Savvy Moms and on Facebook and Twitter at Parents Aware. We would love to get your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to this podcast. Until next week, let's keep talking.